It's
All
okay.
right, he responded and said we're good to go. Sick. All right, so this is August 14th, 2017, and I'm with John Brown, and we're doing the Q&A for Nail the Mix. Thank you all for being here. Awesome. I just want to get a good old, give me get a number one if you can hear us.
They can
I
hear
can't
you, but can
hear
they hear
you.
me?
Kidding.
Is that the voice of
I'm
God?
watching you guys from above. All of you. Everybody in the chat, I'm watching you.
Uh, I will be your replacement beard for the afternoon, since Mr. Al Levy is a little busy at the moment. What I would like from you guys is I'm going to type a demo of how I like questions to be written. And if you're new with us, you will see this for the first time. And I will ask that you do this because I'll be reading these off. And you guys will be typing, and it'll be very difficult to read because I'm slightly dyslexic as one, and two, the text is really small, and three, I'm mildly stupid. So let's work with this. Um, Question here. Just like that. All right. So how's your day going so far, John?
um, yeah, pretty good. Listen to what we did yesterday. It sounds good. So that's always a bonus. Um, I mean, some of you guys have probably seen some pictures of what myself and EL are up to at the moment. Um, so yeah, it's been fun. I'm absolutely starving right now because EL hasn't seen me yet to go get food.
Hey, I was not the chauffeur. That's what interns are for.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
guys, all you guys out there, out in the world who are trying to be interns or have interns, get really good at bringing food. Okay, that's all.
And coffee, because I'd spent $12 on a coffee this morning to get it delivered.
What?
Yeah,
Oh man, that gives me anxiety.
yeah. It's
Well,
a little
Al
expensive.
asked a question. Let's see here. What are you filming with Al?
A bunch of stuff. So one of the things that we're doing is how to record heavy metal guitars through a bunch of different platforms. So you've seen pictures of us with a bunch of amps. We're also going to do it for modelers, amp sims, and we're going to do it for more as well. So we're going to see what we can do with that basically. But it sounds pretty awesome. Yeah, sounds great. But
Sure.
it's really, really in depth. So we're going through the entire process that I would do, basically.
I can only
So it's
imagine if
cool.
it's your process because you're a machine.
Yeah, I don't know. Like with amps, like I've never really had a proper opportunity at home to do in depth as I do when I'm in the studio. So it's cool to be able to actually show people that. Um, so yeah, I mean, we had a selection of 7 amps and 4 cabs, and it was it was cool just to even just stand there and choose what one we thought sounded good in the room. So yeah, you guys are going to get all the internal info of what we've been doing here very, very soon.
See here. Oh, we got a question from Tyler Goodwin. What was the most challenging part on the Monuments mix for you?
So for people that don't know, like Chris overran his vocal recording by I think 4 to 6 weeks with EL, and he left me 5 days to mix and master that record. Otherwise, the record would have been postponed for 6 to 12 months from our label.
Oof.
So I had 5 days to mix it, and truth be told, I thought that Ida Creator was the hardest one to mix. The hardest part is obviously the guitar is a mid-range instrument and there's a lot of guitars going on. So often at times the guitar can interfere with the vocals. That was kind of the hardest part for me, getting the guitars and the vocals to sit right. You've noticed in certain parts, I don't know if it has it in either creator, actually, I haven't looked at that project for a little while, but on some sections of that album, there is 4 tracks of rhythm guitars, as well as clean guitars, which there's up to four of. And then you have lead guitars as well. So trying to carve all this space for this mid-range instrument, get your snare to cut through, and have the vocals sit well is quite difficult.
I can
Yeah.
only imagine. That's a lot of elements to balance at once. Just like if you have two leads, it's 10 guitars right there with that clean part.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of guitars going on. Like right now, I write in a little bit of a different way than I did with the amanuensis. Like I try and use different instruments for different timbres. And if from the album you'll hear it on Quasimodo, there's like a didgeridoo at the end and stuff like that. So I've started incorporating that sort of stuff. So I don't have to go through this nightmare of 20 guitar tracks. But I would say definitely getting the mid range of the guitars right, so the vocals cut through, the snare cuts through. It's quite difficult. That's probably the most challenging aspect of that mix for me. Definitely.
I think that's a challenging part of any mix when we're guys like us are starting out. It's a difficult thing.
It is,
You
yeah.
either hear
It's
it or you
trying to make
don't.
it's trying to make it sound big, but also make sure that nothing interferes. So it's actually quite difficult to find that balance. Yeah.
Let's see here, Colton Hunter. What is your standard procedure before doing an album with a band? Do you make them sign a contract? If so, what would be included in it? Thanks.
Um, like we all have a learning curve for this, and I've definitely been, excuse my language, fucked over by a few bands over the course of my time of recording them. So first things first, I always make them pay for a certain percentage of what it's going to cost up front to make sure that they don't cancel on you 1 or 2 days before you're supposed to start recording, because that is really infuriating. So that's the first thing that you should do. A non-refundable deposit, so it almost gets them tied in. I'd also, depending if it was mixing or recording, I would highlight that they have X amount of time. And if they go over that X amount of time, then you want to also include like a day rate on top of that. Or, some people just, they charge per song and then there's no time limit. It's just when and when it's finished. But I'd also include that, say they wanted you to mix, make sure that you say that editing isn't part of the mixing. And if they have to, if you have to do editing, then that is an extra cost. And all those little things, like when you say you're going to mix a track to people, a lot of the time people think that that means doing absolutely everything when it actually doesn't. Um, I guess the weirdest thing that I've seen from people when I go to mix their projects is they think that time is unlimited, which is quite hard because obviously you want to make it sound the best it can, but you also don't want to screw yourself over by undercharging for the mix and the master. Um, so I always say that there's X amount of revisions that can be done for the amount that they've paid, and it's normally 2 or 3. Sometimes I go out my way and help them out, but most of the time I'll say if it's any more revisions than that, then I'll have to start charging per rate, and that will be in the contract before, so that there's no surprises. Um, so yeah, it's just stuff like that, pretty simple stuff, but just to make sure that I don't get screwed over doing more work than I should have done.
Absolutely. It's a big thing. If anyone here is a speed mixing member, most of the things that John just talked about, it's a lot of things Joel goes over about making sure that you don't get yourself screwed over. Stuff like that's really important. So I want to make sure if this is the first time you've heard it, you really let that sink into your head because that's an important bit of information he just gave you guys.
People will definitely try and screw you over.
They
Yeah,
don't
they
even think
definitely
about
will.
it. They just do it, and it's just one of those things where it just happens.
Yeah, I don't think it's like they're doing it on purpose. I think when you quote to mix a song, they think that that means unlimited time, and I think you just need to make sure that you tell them that no, it's not. It's this mix plus this revision. If you want anything changed after that, then it's extra. Yeah.
Sick. Xavier Buchanan. Oh, read that right. I was really gonna say Buchanan. What advice would you give to a band starting completely from scratch in a similar style genre to Monument slash your previous work? An example, what do you wish you could have done better? What did you do well coming up in the industry? Thank you, enormous fan. Can't wait for M3.
So with Monuments, we got quite lucky. So we released Admit Defeat as our first song, and we instantly got a booking agent for Europe, which was a guy called Marco from Avocado Booking, which some of you may know. So we got quite lucky in that aspect that we already had a booking agent and hadn't actually played any shows. Um, and that is the hardest thing to get. It's like when you're first starting out, you need these people to help you along the way, and that is kind of what you're trying to aim for. And now we're in a completely different point in time than when I first started with Fell Silent in 2004, because you didn't have Facebook and you didn't have these huge platforms where you can already spread your music before you've even played a show. You know, we're seeing it more and more, these artists that are getting really big and they've never played a show before. You know, a really good example of that is a band like Polyphia. Like, they were already, you know, fairly well known before they went out on tour, and their first ever US tour was actually with us in 2014. And you know, they're doing really well. And I think that's part of what you should do as a band to start with now, is to, you know, get your music on the internet, get people to hear it, and then play shows, you know, locally when you can. But you really do need a booking agent to help you with that further. You want to be on tour with bands that are in a similar sort of style, that bring people in so that they can hear your style of music. I mean, the first ever tour we did on Avocado was kind of not good for us in very many ways. It was Winds of Plague with Stick to Your Guns and For Today and us opening, and we sound nothing like those bands. But it got us the experience that we needed, so in a way it was definitely beneficial. But then the second tour we got was Periphery, Tesseract and Monuments, which was definitely more beneficial to us. And that was in the start of 2011. So yeah, when it comes to a band starting out, all you really want to do is put your music on the internet, make sure it's the best it can possibly be. And that is where I would personally start. You just want to spread it in all the corners of the internet as you can. If you've got friends that really like you, make sure they're spreading it around as well. That's kind of what we did with Monuments, actually. You know, the first track went up. It got premiered on a metal station here in the UK first. So if you have any contacts for any PR companies, like we call it PR over here, I don't know what you guys call it in the States, but it's basically people that get you onto radio, you know, into magazines, although I don't really think magazines is really that important anymore. You know, getting you onto all the news sites and stuff like that. You know, you've got Metal Injection, Metal Sucks and stuff like that. If you can get on there, then that's definitely a big help too. But honestly, it's all about who you know. Definitely. So just like go to shows, make friends, see if you can meet people, and then, you know, that's the people you want to spread your music to.
Be a social creature, guys. You hear that? It's really easy to get caught up and never leave your house, because I mean, like working on an album or something like that, you can just never talk to anyone for like 3 months, and then it's just like, what are social skills?
Yeah, for the first two Monuments records, Gnosis and the Amanuensis, I deleted my Facebook so that I could actually physically write the albums, because I used to spend so much time on social media. And I don't think it's because I want to actually read what people are up to. I think it's more just that it becomes almost like an addiction.
Mm-hmm. Habitual. I mean? It's so, part of the day.
Yeah.
Just like taking a poop. Let's see here. Stephen Ward. How much time do you spend dialing in a guitar tone pre-recording?
Actually, this is actually a really good question, because a lot of time, this is actually one problem that I've noticed with a lot of people, is they'll spend all this time dialing in a guitar tone that sounds good by itself. And in my eyes, that's not the best way to get a guitar tone. Like, I will often sit there and have my drums and bass on as well, because if the guitar tone doesn't work with the drums and the bass, then it's not going to work for the song. If it sounds good by itself, it doesn't mean that it's going to work in a mix. So for the Amanuensis, I sat there with the drums and bass going roughly mixed, trying to get a guitar sound around what was there. And by itself, you know, you can even hear it on the Either Creator mix. It doesn't sound that great, but it works when you put it in the mix. And I think sometimes that people get so caught up in hearing a guitar that sounds great by itself, when in actuality, that's never actually ever going to work. You know, when you're playing live with a band, the reason that you can cut through is because the guitar is sitting well with the bass and the drums. And I feel the same way about guitar tones with, you know, recording albums. So if you're ever stuck getting a guitar tone that, you know, you think, you know, you're obsessing over what it sounds like by itself, then listen to it with the drums and the bass. That's the best way, in my opinion.
Agreed. All my guitar patches now went from sounding good by themselves to sounding like complete shit when I play them by myself, because it's just all mixes now.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean, I can understand why, you know, Metallica, the scooped thing, because it sounds really good when you play by yourself. But then when you go into a band scenario, you can't hear any of the notes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's cool to have like a guitar tone that works well for you when you're playing by yourself, but it's a completely different thing when you're putting it into a mix. In my opinion, of course. You know, I might be completely wrong. But
I
that's
think you're
how it's
right.
worked for me. I think that's what's worked for me, so I've stuck with it.
Let's see here. Dan Masaglia. That's your name from now on, if that's not your name. With so little time to mix and other challenging situational factors, are there any mixing or other artistic choices, specifically on the Creator or the rest of the album, you made that you regret, or at least weren't the best choices that you could have made at the time?
It's funny because that song took me 2 years to write. So I initially had the first riffs for that in November 2010. I wrote that just after I finished writing Gnosis. And it went through various different forms, and there's even a Periphery version of that song, because I toured with Periphery in 2011. They really liked those riffs, so we worked on it, and we wrote a really cool song from it. But I still think the version that is now is the best version of that song. As far as artistic choices, I'm actually really happy with that song. I don't feel like I could have made that song any better. And Chris absolutely made that song for me as well. I think the vocals are phenomenal on that song. So as far as artistic choices, a lot of decisions on the Amanuensis were made when I came to record the final guitar parts. And, I had everything written out, but sometimes it's good to leave certain things to chance, I think. Occasionally you're writing something and then a riff comes out that you haven't even tried to make any better, and it's just great. And sometimes I think spur of the moment stuff is completely forgotten in music now. So I actually left a couple of things to chance on that record, and there's a couple of parts in the I the Creator that are actually that, and it's a couple of the clean sections where I just played and then pressed record, and that is the clean section in the verse.
Sick.
Like I had something written out and it was based around it, but in the end I just played around with it and it turned out cool. So
Do you find
uh,
yourself doing stuff like that often, or is it just kind of like a idea here and there type thing?
like I'll often get a song completely written out, and then just when I'm in the recording stage, I'm like, oh, I'm going to try this because this would sound cool here, and just spur of the moment ideas to sort of link the riffs together. Sometimes just like changing one note at the end of a phrase to make it go into the next bit a little bit better, and certain things like that. That's normally what happens when I'm recording the final guitars and the final bass. So I'll have it completely written out where I think it sounds great, and then just if something pops up while I'm recording the guitars, then I'll try and add it in as well. Just as an example, I spent a month recording the guitars and the bass to the Amanuensis, and that was 9 hours a day.
Oof.
Yeah, so I think, sometimes, even if there is time constraints, sometimes you do have to take your time to make it what you want it to be. The drums got recorded in 4 days, so I feel like a failure for taking a month. Yeah.
But you kind
Yeah,
of did a bunch of shit.
yeah. I mean, I can understand, like, there's time constraints and stuff like that, but sometimes it's best just to take a sit back, take your time, and make it as great as you can. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see here. Christian Bistrishki. I watched your set on Vakken. I said that word right. Noticed the bass player slap pretty much all the time. How do you mix slap and modern prog gent so well?
So when it comes to the slap stuff, normally that isn't on the record. Swanee plays some parts of the record, but most of the time he tries to leave it to me because I'm better with a pick. And then when there's any parts that need to be slapped, then he'll do it because I'm absolutely useless at doing slap. But what tends to happen is we've never really had the time to sit down properly and spend, like a year or, at least a couple of months where we all learn the songs completely and see what works for each part. We never really have ever had the opportunity to do that. So when it comes to us playing it live, we'll play it live for a little bit, and then Swanee will feel like what works best, his fingers, slapping or pick, and he'll usually pick between it. And you'll notice on like songs like Origin of Escape, he'll switch between all three depending on the part. So yeah, that's basically just what he thought worked best, after playing it live for some time. And I think it sounds great what he does. And it's cool because it adds something a little bit different to the metal genre, you know.
I
Well, I say
totally,
different. I mean, Korn did it.
yeah.
But
Just,
well, yeah, constantly worshipping new metal.
I mean, just the
But yeah,
idea of improving a little bit in the sense of like where your performance comes from. I feel like it like when you have fans and your fans see like you're that talented of a musician that you can take your song and present it to them slightly different but still the same way. Like I don't know, like I really dig stuff like that whenever I see it.
I really dig stuff like that too. I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I grew up on as well, because you know you got all these bands like Incubus, and you can hear mistakes on their records, and they sometimes change it a little bit live, which is cool. And that's the only downside with playing with a metronome live, that you can't, you're really sort of like locked in to what you're doing. Um, but yeah, it's cool. It's cool that you can change things around live if you want to, you know, and we do that quite a lot. So yeah.
Awesome. Colton Hunter. Yay, someone with a name I can read. What would you say is the best way to get every song to sound consistent on an album? Do you make a template or do every song in the same session? Thanks.
It totally depends. I mean, I've always wanted to record each song so slightly differently for what it, you know, what it needs. But again, not had the opportunity. But when it comes to writing, I'll write in one big project, so that then you get the consistency of the guitars, and you know the drums all sound the same and stuff. But you know, sometimes I just think it'd be cool if we just mixed songs that sounded good for that individual song. And you know, some of the bigger bands do that, like Muse. I know that some of their albums they recorded the drums in different studios for each song. And then you get certain albums where certain songs are mixed by some people and others are mixed by others, and then it's, you know, made to sound consistent in the mastering. Um, so when it comes to consistency, yeah, I'll do all the ideas in one project, and sometimes, depending on if the record needs it, I'll mix the whole thing in one record. But that can be an automation nightmare, in all honesty. um, so yeah, I mean, you might end up with like, you know, lots and lots of tracks in one session, but if you want the consistency, then just do it all in one session. Definitely. And then just have different tracks for like different sounds. So say you've got your main core guitar sound. If you want a slightly different guitar sound for another song, then you just shift it to another track. And then have a slightly different guitar sound, but all the other elements sounding kind of the same.
Awesome. Let's see here. Derek Clayton, what are your main influences, both as an artist and a mix engineer?
Well, let's start with artist. Obviously, everyone can hear Meshuggah. We all rip off Meshuggah, you know. So yeah, Meshuggah, Gajira recently actually. Funny thing is that the first time I saw Gajira live, I walked out because I thought it was dog shit. How stupid am I? That was on the From Master Sirius tour, and it just sounded too metal for me at the time. I just wanted to hear Meshuggah all the time, you know. So yeah, Meshuggah, Gajira. I really like some of Devin Townsend's stuff as well. And Strapping Young Lad, definitely City is one of my favorite albums. Carnival are a great band. I've listened to them since 2008, 2009 time. Um, you know, I like stuff like Hans Zimmer now as well, which is really fantastic. My mind's just drawn a blank on more artists, but you know, I listen to a diversity of stuff like Michael Jackson as well. I would definitely say is up there. Stevie Wonder, all the stuff that my mum used to play to me as a kid. You know, she had like Santana, Sade, um, Herbie Hancock, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson. Earth, Wind and Fire is great too. Um, so yeah, a mixture of everything really. My dad used to listen to classical music, so there's a lot of classical music that I like as well. One of my favorite pieces of music is Stravinsky, The Rites of Spring. Um, but then as a mixing engineer, like I've always strived to be Andy Wallace. I absolutely love Andy Wallace's mixes. You know, like a lot of the albums that I grew up on were Andy Wallace. So you had Nirvana's Nevermind, Jeff Buckley's Grace, Thrice, The Artist in the Ambulance, just to name a couple. So yeah, Andy Wallace, I really like. I really like Andy Sneap as well, especially some of his earlier mixes. What he did for Despised Icon was incredible. I can't remember the album title now, but he did one of their albums, and I thought the guitar tone was just enormous. Obviously, he mixed Killswitch Engage as well, which is cool. other mixing engineers. Let me have a think. My mind's drawn a blank again. Forrester Savell, who did Carnival. That's a really, really good mix on Sound Awake. I really like that mix. Guga Garth. I actually don't know his full name. It's funny. I just know him as Guga Garth, which is really bad, actually. But he mixed, I believe he mixed the first Rage Against the Machine records, which was self-titled. Who else is... I've drawn a massive blank. It's really weird when you get asked questions and you know the answer, but then you just draw a blank. I like mixing engineers that capture the sound of the band. Where that they've mixed it, but every single album that they mix is it's a different sound, but it's them.
So it's like the band through the engineer / mastering engineer's filter?
Yeah, you know what I mean? You can still hear that it's the band. And that's actually one of the reasons I quite like Steve Evans as well. Because it's just like the band and it sounds really pissed off. Some of his earlier Dillinger stuff is quite, it's quite loose, but it sounds angry. So it's cool. I'm into that, But yeah, I mean, there's so many good mixing engineers now. It's just like whether or not you like their sound. You know what I mean?
I definitely agree, especially with technology being the way it is, and all of us are getting on the same level.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for me, what amazes me about Andy Wallace is that most of his mixes, when you listen to them, you can hear that it's just pretty much EQ and compression, and the fact that he's just got really good source material to work with. So yeah, that's what I'd like to be able to mix on a SSL desk or an Eve console, and just literally do the tiniest bit of EQ and it just works. So yeah, Andy Wallace is probably one of my favorite mixing engineers, definitely.
Awesome. Let's see here. Lots of cues. Tyler Goodwin. Was the natural drums with no sample replacement a decision based on that being the sound you were looking for, or due to your limited gear / plugins you mentioned having at the time?
No, it was just that I thought the drums were played well enough. If you guys haven't heard Mike Mallion play, you'll know that he's an absolute monster. And the drums were recorded really well. They were recorded in a studio in Wales called Mono Valley. And they've had, Funeral for a Friend there. Oasis was in that studio, Ozzy Osbourne. And it was recorded by a really, really good producer as well, Romesh Dodengoda. And Mike just hit the absolute living shit out of that drum kit, and I thought it sounded awesome. I really wish I had more than 5 days to mix the original record. But I just don't think it needed to be ruined with samples. Well, not necessarily ruined, but I thought that Mike's consistency was good enough to be translated to record. So I left it as natural samples, basically.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like someone who really wanted to beat the shit out of the drum kit. So I prefer that over that flattened sample replacement sound. Like when people blend in a snare with a real snare, and then you just get that flat sound versus the real person slamming their hand into the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's I really I'm always into natural mixes. To me, it's just when you can hear the band playing, it's awesome. And that's why I love the sound of The Violent Sleep of Reason by Sugar. It's why I fell in love with Nothing, because it sounds like a band in a room, and it's just awesome. So totally. Yeah, I just prefer natural overall, really. Not to say the samples are wrong, though.
No, absolutely not. I use them
can still sound great. Yeah.
I think everyone still uses them. It's just one of those things where it's you don't try to go for the veggies first on your plate. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
Let's see here. Daniel Wallen, how would you decide on what would be a good price to charge bands when starting or getting clients?
Well, it's really hard on that one because, I still don't really know what to charge people. It's well, when I first started out, it was stupidly cheap. I just wanted to get almost like a portfolio going. But it depends what you're going to be doing for the band and how much you think your time is worth. because that's what it's down to. If you think your time's worth X amount, then try charging X amount, and if you don't get any clients, then maybe just rethink what you want to get. You know.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, especially in places here like New York, because you go down the block from my studio because there's a bunch of different studios inside my building, and they charge $300 or more, and then you go to a different part of New York City, and then it's $400 more expensive. And you go to a different part, and it's like everyone's charging different prices. There's no competitive like pricing to really gauge it off of. So it goes back to what you said, what you value your time at. It's one of those weird things.
Exactly, and if you have a portfolio where the stuff's good, then people will catch on, and then once people catch on, that's when you can start charging more when the demand's there, you know.
Absolutely. Stephen Ward's asking, is there a piece of gear that you find indispensable in the recording studio?
As much as I hate to say this right now because they're absolutely horrible, but the NS10s have saved my life. They are just horrible in every possible way, but every single day I listen to them, it just reminds me that no matter how good you think a mix is, it will tear that mix apart. And it's really good because if you get the mix sounding good on those speakers, it translates so well on everything else. So that for me, since I've only had them just under 2 years now, and it pretty much saved me. So I would say having a set of NS10s so I can hear everything that sounds horrible, basically. Yeah, I think the NS10s would be the biggest thing for me right now. But you know, there's so many different items, you know, that you could pick. But yeah, NS10s. Yeah, I'll stick with that.
You answered the first part of this question already by Dustin Jachow, so I'm going to ask the second part. What is your take on the importance of having all guitars and bass on an album performed by the same right hand?
It depends on the style of music. It really does. So, say we're playing metal, and the bass is following complex polyrhythmic guitar parts, then it will always sound more consistent if the same player plays it. Whereas if you have a bass that sort of interweaves around what the guitarist's doing, then you can get away with having someone else play it. It's totally dependent on what's going on, basically. Like, say you had like a rock band, you know, that was playing, that had a moving bass part, and then the guitars were doing something different. I think that would be cool if you got the bass player to play those parts. And if there's a lot of pop and slap and a lot of fingerstyle, and you're a guitar player and you can play with a pick, then sometimes it's also better just to have the bass player play it, in my opinion. But if you're playing Meshuggah style riffs, let the guitar player play it. Also, I find that the person that wrote the riff generally plays it better.
Mm-hmm.
As well, that's one thing I've noticed. So yeah, say you've got two guitar players and you each individually wrote riffs, then let the guitar player that wrote the riff play it, because it will probably have the feeling it was supposed to have more so. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, feeling is the most important thing, I think, is the main thing to take away from that, just making sure it's consistent.
Exactly, and it feels good. Like, feels human, you know? I guess that's kind of why I'm against editing guitars quite a lot. I like to hear the player play it. So.
Oh yeah. I've definitely been to a few studios here where guys are a big fan of taking guitars note by note and chopping them up and rearranging them, and I never get it. But you know, I'll tell you, Sean.
Sick.
It's like
I actually,
programming.
you know what? I can actually understand why people do it. Like, it does sound consistent and it sounds cool in a certain way, but it doesn't sound like anyone played it. It sounds like a machine. So I guess it's just a stylistic thing. So
yeah,
it depends. Again, it just depends. You know.
You right. Let's see here. Luke lose. Did you ever feel that cannot balance? Okay, I'm going to try and correct what you said here as you said it. Did you ever feel that you cannot balance your livelihood and musician life? I feel trapped in such a complex zone. Share some advice, please.
It's really difficult. You'll get depressed a lot. during that process. Yeah, it's really difficult to sort of balance, like, do you have enough money to live your life to what should be a standard of living? I completely get that. Yeah, it's really difficult. I've had part-time jobs in the past, things I've not wanted to do just so that I could continue doing music. And that's what I would suggest. If you want to spend all your time on music, then get a part-time job that covers your bills and covers your food and stuff like that, and then spend the rest of the time enjoying the time to write music and just be thankful that you have that time and you can still live. But unfortunately, yeah, you have to sacrifice sometimes to make dreams come true. I guess that's probably the don't let your dreams be dreams. No, but yeah, I would yeah, if you're struggling like with finances and trying to base livelihood, then you definitely need to just make sure your bills are paid and then enjoy the rest of the time. But yeah, working full time sucks when you're trying to do music. I find it quite impossible to do that.
Yeah, unless you're not sleeping.
I was a graphic designer during my time in Fell Silent, and I found it incredibly difficult to find the want to actually sit in front of my computer after being at work to write music. So yeah, it's get a part-time job and just pay bills, and then spend the rest of the time doing music. Definitely.
Solid advice. Let's see here. Sergio Agartua. For a person starting out and trying to record bands, what would one look into first when trying to get into some analog hardware? Really liked your Stam audio reviews, which were really sick, by the way. You made that stuff sound really good.
Dude, that stuff is absolutely phenomenal. The Stam audio stuff is really great, and it's cheap as well. And I think it might be cheaper than Warm Audio, around the same price. And I think it sounds infinitely better. But the hardware, as far as hardware goes for what you want, I mean, I find that it makes the biggest difference to drums and vocals, and bass as well. Like guitars, you can kind of get away with it. The only real compressor I use on guitars is an LA3A, and I only touch it, so I wouldn't really get anything like that. But there's one compressor on drums that just sounds phenomenal, and I can't remember the audio design. What's the name of it? Let me try and find this quickly while while I'm on here. It's got colored knobs on the front. I think it's called Audio Design FX something.
If anyone wants to chime in that knows offhand.
Yeah, like we used one on Creative Live. And that's it. Yeah, Audio Design. It is. It's called the F760X RS Compex, and it's a 2U rack mount compressor. And the first time I heard it was about 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when I was in LA, and Francesco Camelli of Sphere Studios had it, and he referred to it as the Led Zeppelin compressor. And it squashes the drums in such a nice way, but it is really expensive. It's about I think it's about $2,000 secondhand, which is quite a lot of money for a piece of outboard gear. But it just squashes and makes parallel drum compression sound absolutely incredible. And it's also really good on bass. Another piece of outboard gear is obviously 1176. I prefer the Bluey overall, which is cool. I really like that one on vocals and bass. A Distressor, again, is a great piece of outboard gear, but quite expensive. An LA2A, mainly just for vocals. But, if you've got good preamps, then you could probably get away with using the ones inside your, computer or your DAW, until you can afford the outboard gear. But, those 3 or 4 items. I mean, if you want something cheap, actually, you can buy a DBX 160 compressor, which is really good on bass, really good on kick drum, really good on snare. And you can pick those up for about $300 secondhand. I mean, they're good compressors. But yeah, there's so many different pieces of outboard that I would buy. And it's just a case of money, But the Stam Audio 1073 preamps are great. The Stam Audio SA4000 bus compressor is also great. And I'm really looking forward to trying out their 76 and their 2A as well. So, yeah. I don't think I can really give any solid advice on that because I'm going to buy everything.
I think that's the issue with all of us.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
We're just looking for the right person to say buy this item, and then we take our credit cards out. That's really what it is. I feel like sometimes.
I think so too.
Let's see here. Stephen Ward. Oh, you just answered this. Do you mix in the box, out of the box, or a mixture of the two? He does a mixture of the two. Let's see here. Luke
Most of the
Lurs.
time it's in the box, though. Most of the time it is in the box. It's just a case of the fact that I don't have enough outboard. I use the outboard for certain aspects of it.
Gotcha.
But if I had a board and all the outboard, I would never mix in the box. Yeah.
Let's see. Luke Lurs. How do you treat the tone in live and studio mixing? Sometimes I feel like things are all right in a mix, but it cannot really bring to the live house, so that's confusing. Oh, that's about something we were kind of talking about earlier.
Yeah, it kind of was. Yeah, so studio and live is really weird. I mean, especially if you're using modelers for both. Modelers are quite different than in the studio. With live, unless you've got a digital board, you're kind of restricted on what you can do with it. That's a really hard question. Like when I play live with my guitar amp, I generally leave most of the controls at noon, and then just adjust ever so slightly depending on the room I'm in. Because I use an amp live as opposed to my modeler. I use my Line 6 for clean sounds live. So yeah, it's quite a hard question to answer that one. I don't think I'm gonna be able to answer that one very well. Yeah.
I also feel like a guy like you, when you play, you're more looking for like how the amp saturates to your hands versus how the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. So I play with really low gain. Yeah, I play with really low gain, and then yeah, just let the amp sort of like translate what my hand is doing. So I find that less gain is more, in a live
Yeah.
scenario as well, because the notes cut through easier. It doesn't sound as fizzy and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a really hard question to answer because I'll actually use less gain in the studio than live as well, but I still hardly use any gain live. So yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. Just yeah, what you need to do is get in a room with your band and see what sounds good. That's like the best way you can really do it. And then it's such a hard question to answer. I'm sorry, I can't answer that anymore.
I think you did answer it though.
Yeah.
Christian again is asking, the first time I discovered you, John, was in the Doxa video on EMG TV. I was literally speechless watching your right hand, like most of us are. Can you tell us a bit more about how you developed your rhythm technique?
James Hetfield. Okay, so basically what happened, I started recording myself in probably around 2001. Didn't really do the down picking thing then, but then as I got into Fell Silent, I started doing it more. And then one thing I noticed when I was recording that there wasn't much consistency in my playing, and I was looking at DI signals. It was kind of all over the place. You'd have some transients really high, some quiet. So that's kind of where I picked up on it. I was like, well, maybe if I can play consistent, it will sound better, and I was right. So the more consistent I played, the less gain that I was using because I was not compensating for the notes that I was playing badly. So it was a case of, it wasn't something that just happened. It took years of practice for a very, very long time. A lot of frustrated days. I definitely remember being frustrated a lot. But for example, like Doxa took me 6 months to be able to play start to finish. Like, I wrote that song probably in a week, but in terms of actually being able to play it start to finish, it took me about 6 months. And it's just a case of consistency. Sometimes, if you write this stuff, you'll find it just takes a long time to play. And yeah, the consistency thing for my right hand was just something that I built up over years. But listening to Metallica was a big influence in that, and trying to play Metallica's song. I mean, if any of you have seen my Master of Puppets cover on YouTube, I actually had to stop playing and when it says wrist fire break because I literally couldn't handle it. And this guy, Hetfield, plays that like that, and he sings. So if you want to learn to downpick, try playing Master of Puppets start to finish. Just record yourself playing it until you get it super tight and super consistent, and it will take years. Like, it's a really hard song to play, and I don't think it's given enough credit by, left hand's pretty easy, but the right hand is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So that's kind of like, yeah, Metallica, and then watching myself, recording myself is kind of where I saw the problem and worked on it from that. Sorry, I talk a lot, by the way.
No, this is good. I'm glad I can ask a question and not I still have a lot of questions to go. So like sometimes when you're asking questions, you run out of questions really easy, and then it just comes to like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to look around my room and think of something to ask you questions about. What are your thoughts on computer chargers? So thank you. Thank you. I'm sure everyone here loves hearing from you too.
Thank you guys for asking all the questions.
Colton Hunter's asking, what is your standard procedure for backing up sessions and files? How often do you do it? Thanks.
I'm really bad at backing up stuff, to be honest. Believe it or not, I nearly lost the amanuensis before I came here. Yeah, it's on. I need to. I think I've backed it up now, but I'm really bad at backing shit up, and normally don't do it, and don't take advice from me. But that's not other
The
people's
reason I'm not on
projects.
this, the reason I'm not on this Q&A right now is because I'm sitting here backing up a bunch of stuff for us. So someone's doing it. Don't worry. Back up everything multiple times.
Yeah,
Everybody,
multiple
multiple
times. Yeah,
times. If it doesn't exist on more than, if it doesn't exist in at least two places, it doesn't exist. That's
yeah,
kind of the way it is.
it is.
So the shit that we've been filming exists on two different hard drives, plus it's going to Crash Plan. So it's going to exist in three places. And I haven't, and I'm not doing this just because I am backing up stuff and my computer gets crazy. So yeah, you guys should back up everything. Don't be a chump. Not you, John.
I'm a
Them.
chump. I'm definitely a chump.
No, you got me
But
backing it
yeah.
up. Someone's backing it up. So that's what matters. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Okay. But I learned from that mistake about a year ago when one of my hard drives kind of died. I managed to salvage most of the stuff off it, and I backed it up again. So since then, I've been a lot better. But I think it's mainly due to the fact that I never seem to have enough hard drive space. I can never buy enough hard drives. It's really bad. Like I'll buy a new hard drive, and then like a couple of minutes later, it's almost full. Well, more than a couple of minutes, but you get the idea. But yeah, I've gotten a lot better over the past year. But for the first like 5 years, 5 years ago, I was really bad at it. But now everything is backed up twice. So make sure you back up everything at least twice. So you have a main backup and then a backup of the backup that's probably going to fuck up.
Life hates us all,
Yeah.
so it tends to be that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine
Oh.
what your hard drives look like. You probably have music ideas like every other day, and
Exactly. We have a friend that's just come in the room. Now, this guy is sick.
Hey, everybody.
This is Matt Browne, ladies and gentlemen. Except there won't be any ladies in this room.
There's no ladies.
I don't think there is.
no, there's like three.
Oh, shit, it's Matt Browne. Wow, Browne and Browne.
He can't hear you. I'm on.
I can't hear anything. You
Oh,
guys look
well,
beautiful, though.
thank you.
Let's see, Jose Valverde here. Ooh, I think I said that.
Oh, nice. Okay.
What was your setup for recording guitars and bass in the album? And what guitars, basses, pickup strings did you use for recording at that time? I think the bass and guitar tones sound amazing. Greetings from Ecuador. Huge fan here.
Greetings from Orlando to Ecuador. Nice to meet you. So yeah, the guitar tones and the bass tones on the amanuensis was Pod XT Pro, and I also took a DI of the bass that I used through an Ampeg SVX plugin. So the pod for the bass is doing the bottom end, and then the SVX would have been doing everything else. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I've used on every single album up until recently, just the Pod XT Pro. Mainly because I've never had a place to do amped guitars properly. during album cycles. So with the amanuensis, we decided to spend our budget on making sure the drums sounded good and the vocals sounded good, and then I did everything on my part at home. But I lived in a house where I couldn't crank a guitar amp loud enough to make it sound great. I did try with my Laney IRT that I had, but I couldn't get the sound that I was hearing in my head out of it. So yeah, that's what I use for the guitar tones.
That actually brings up a question that I actually have. When it comes to your songwriting, do you often write everything out, or is some of it just like kind of spur of the moment, just like this sounds good?
A lot of it is spur of the moment now. Like sometimes it takes like months to write a song, but sometimes it comes together in less than a week. Doxa was written in 6 days, just as an example, whereas Regenerate took 3 months.
Oh wow!
And then I, the Creator, took 2 years. So it's just totally dependent on on certain factors. I don't know. Sometimes you're more inspired than others. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Definitely feel that one. Stephen Beltran's asking here. My apologies if this has been asked already. Okay, well, I accept your apology. Audio dropped up. What one or two things, if any, have made a significant impact on advancing your mixing skills in a short amount of time? Thank you for your time.
NS10s. It was definitely the NS10s, man. Like the moment I got them, I was like, everything sounds horrible.
What were you using before?
I had a set of Focal CMS 65s, which are incredibly smooth with no transients. I actually mixed both records, Monuments records, on those monitors. And yeah, it was just the transient on them wasn't there, whereas with the Yamahas, all you can hear is transient. So it was great. It was great to switch to the NS10s. That's what really helped my mixing along. It just made me realize that what I was doing wasn't wrong. I was just doing too much of certain things. So yeah.
Bavnish, sorry, man. Yes, he is coming up with a guitar course with us, and he was hoping you'd share some insight, which he did earlier. So if you wait for the Q&A to be re-uploaded by Al later, you'll be able to kind of get that part. And let's go on to the next question here. Christian's asking, is there a concept behind the amanuensis, lyrics, songs, names, etc.?
Yeah, there was a huge concept that that Chris actually has an entire story for. It's kind of a play on words. So, like when I first wrote it, I was writing about the samsara cycle. So it's a lot of like, just as an example, like so the song "The Alchemist" was originally called Anagami when I wrote it, and Anagami is just a partially enlightened person that has distanced themselves from from some of the binds of the mind. And I was writing stuff like that, and then Chris just took what I was saying that I was writing the songs about and then made a story around it. So then you have almost like a superhero story where you have Sam and you have Sarah in a constant cycle, which is what the samsara cycle is. And like for example, when I wrote the song Horcrux, it was about how when people die, they still have their souls living amongst their possessions that they give to you, kind of like Harry Potter, Horcrux, and then he managed to incorporate that into his story as well, which was really cool. And he just wrote an entire story around this concept. So you have Sam that's basically trapped in a cycle that he's trying to get out of it, but ends up coming back into the cycle anyway from the path he's chosen. Will always end up at the same point, which is either destroyer and either creator, born, birth and death. But Chris will be able to hopefully one day go into a complete explanation of what the entire story is about, because I feel like I don't do it any credit, because it's actually amazing, like what he wrote for that. And also it'll make the lyrics make more sense for all of you as well. But another example as well is the song Saga City, which is actually a play on words of sagacity. If you guys want to look that up, then you'll probably understand why that song's written as it is. But yeah, Saga City is a place in his story. Yeah, it's cool. It's a really cool story, but I can't go into complete depth about it because I will not do it any justice right now.
Wikipedia and Google, everyone. Go, go, go.
Unfortunately, you can't really find anything about it. It's like Chris has been pretty quiet about it. He wanted to write a whole novel for it, I think. So.
Oh wow. Oh yeah. Well, that makes total sense.
Sounded cool. Yeah.
Rodney's asking, hi Rodney, can you go into detail about the way the guitars were mixed? I'm curious to know the thought process of having them far, mid, and near space.
Okay, so I have this thing, like, whenever I pan guitars hard left and hard right, it sounds kind of a little bit wrong to me, because that's not how that would be perceived in a stereo space, if that makes sense. Like, when you're watching a live band, you don't have the guitar on this side or here. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's not like here and here, it's like there. So I almost do my guitars like a fan out from the middle. So you have the quieter ones in the middle getting gradually louder as they go towards the outside. And that's why you had 4 tracks per side. It was a way that you could pan them and also make them louder. So obviously the furthest ones out are the loudest, and then the ones in the middle are quieter. You'll notice that during the verse of Either Creator, the only 2 guitars playing in the rhythm tracks were the middle 2, the nearest left and the nearest right, and that was meant to be the quietest track, almost like a texture. And then you have the 2 main ones, mid, near, and mid far, which is the main 2 tracks, and then you have a further one going out that should be louder as well. And that's kind of how I try and do guitars. I use different points in the stereo spectrum to get texture and volume, and also more width. So that's kind of why it was labeled like that. I think that Trent Reznor used to do stuff like that, actually, with his guitars. Also out here. So that's cool.
See here, David Adler Diaz _1 is asking, how would you personally go about isolating the toms for mixing?
Romesh did that for me. Romesh did that for me on this album, but obviously strip silence, to isolate the toms. I'm actually quite an avid fan of room mics a lot, and I often keep everything in and only gate the stuff that I don't want in. For example, like I've got a mix that I've for this guitar course. We're actually using the Alchemist for the guitar course, and all I've done is gate the kick drum, and it still sounds punchy and solid. So I think it just depends on what the drummer's like and what the room's like to whether I will isolate the toms or not. But I'm, like, I love Carnival's Sound Awake, and it's basically all room. And the way that the toms interact with the room, because they're not completely stripped, as long as the drummer can play and there's not too much interference from the cymbals, then you can kind of get away with not doing too much to them, in my opinion. You only really want to cut them during the sections when they're not playing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, sometimes if the drummer's really bad, then I'll normally delete them and reprogram them. I'm only kidding. I'll normally strip silence. Try and cut out as much of the as much as I can. But it's all about mic placement. If the mic placement's good, then less you have to do. You can get the cymbals not in the mics if they're positioned well.
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, people spend their whole life trying to find that right snare spot.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we spent a long time on guitar mic positions for this course, and you can really hear a difference. Like, the mic position is basically your EQ. Yeah.
Daniel Wallen's asking, what were the mics used when recording Either Creator? Daniel, I want you to be more specific, because I'm sure he used lots of microphones on lots of things. So just reply back and give me some specifics here so I can ask them. Let's go to the next question real quick, though. Chris Boyd, okay. When will you come back to St. Louis so I can buy you fellas a beer again?
I don't know. Last time we were in St. Louis was the night of Ferguson.
Oh.
Do you guys remember that? Yeah, it was that day. That's when we were last there. It was on the Glass Cloud tour. Hopefully we'll be back. I liked playing Fubar. I remember the show very, very well. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back at some point. Definitely.
Let's see here. Did you use the clean and normal toms on the mix of the song, or did you leave the clean toms, China, splash, etc.?
I actually used the clean toms and the clean china, but I also used. In fact, I don't think there's any ride in that song, so I think I just cut the ride out. I can't remember if there is ride in that song. There might be, but I used the clean toms and the clean china definitely. And I think I cut the ride, Mike. I can't remember. We'll see in the live mix. It was 3 years ago, so yeah, it's kind of hard to remember.
Absolutely, I don't remember what I did yesterday.
I remember 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, bavnish. Sound like a food. I'm not making fun of you, man. You just sound delicious. Do you use a DI box, and which one do you suggest?
Honestly, this has been an ongoing problem for me for a very long time. The amanuensis was recorded directly into my interface at the time, and every DI box that I've ever used, I always have the ability to clip it, and I've not managed to find one that I don't. So I've used, like, for example, the first record, Gnosis, I used a Countryman 85, Type 85, I think that's what it's called, and I clipped the hell out of it. There's not much headroom on that DI box. The Radial J48 is cool. Again, I clip it though, and same with the Little Labs. Like, the Little Labs sounds great, it's just that I clip it. So, you know, in reality, what I should do is hit softer, but I don't want to do that because when I play through the guitar amp, it sounds good. So basically, we need a DI box that can handle me. But yeah, I mean, I would like to use a DI box, but generally I use the interface just because, like, even though it doesn't sound as good, like my old interface I just didn't clip, so that was kind of cool. But I clipped my new interfaces, so I'm kind of lost. If anyone knows a DI box that can handle like 10,000 dB of headroom, then let me know.
Oh shit, we've been at this for an hour. Oh, well, thank you for being with us, and I want to get another question out before we call it a day, and let's look at what we have left to see who has the most interesting question here. We got a panning drums. Yeah, let's do this then.
There's one thing here. There's one thing here that I just want to answer. And some guy was on about even with the pad engaged, and to me, whenever I add pads to stuff, it always sounds worse to my ears. And it's not because it's a decrease in volume. I just don't think that all it's doing is decreasing the volume. I think it's doing something else.
Absolutely, it is. It's doing something else for sure.
Like, if you guys have ever seen the Creative Live course, you'll see the absolute fuckery that EL had to do to make sure that I did not clip the DI signal. You'll see it. It goes into the Little Labs into an API, and then he has to reduce the volume of the API with something, and then it goes into something else. I can't remember what he did, but it was. If you watch the Creative Live course, you can see the signal is going through like 3 different things, just to try not using the pad because it sounds worse. And even with the pad, I'm still clipping it, aren't I? It's just that the signal's not going into the computer clipped, but I'm still clipping the actual device. But now I've put a pad on it, so now it's just a new level of distortion.
Yeah.
So yeah. But anyway, yeah, one more question and we'll call it a day.
All right, so let's see here. Sergio, you're a man for this last question. What is your preference for panning drums, drummer or audience?
I'm constantly battling this one, actually, because I like both. Like, the main reason that people like drummers' perspective drums is so that when they're behind their desk or on their chair air drumming, when you go to the right, it's kind of like following. But I don't know. Like, I'm pretty impartial to both. I like both for different reasons. Like, for example, like, we can say drummer perspective or audience perspective, but what do you do if you get a left-handed drummer? It's not. None of it is fair to the left-handers, is it? Really?
That's true. I've never thought about it until you just said something right now. Wow.
Yeah, because like, even if you do it drummer perspective, what does that mean? Because if the drummer's left-handed, does that mean you still pan it the other way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's quite interesting. I think I think the most for metal that people use is drummer perspective of a right-handed drummer, just so that people can air drum along. I think that's like kind of the standard. But I like it both ways, actually. Sometimes it's cool to hear the toms in the left as well, just for a little bit of change. You know, I know some people are scared of change, but I quite like it. Yeah.
Sick. Thank you for being here. Today is a Monday, August 14th, 2007. The Q&A for Monuments. Mr. John Browne spent his time here. I want you guys to just thank him real quick because he's awesome and amazing at what he does. Can't wait for the live mix.
No, don't thank me. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Don't thank me. Thank you.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
I'd like to
I'm
thank my
looking
mom.
forward to it.
Oh.
I'd like to thank my mom. I'd like to thank my family. And most of all, God.
I'd like to thank EL's beard and for the 10 seconds he put it in his mouth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. I think at this point I just click the end event button. So thank you everyone again for coming out, and it was awesome talking to you, John, and can't wait for the live event.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good day. Bye.